Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch, Serman, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This show is for those who are wanting to learn more about creating financial wellness, and we're going to take different topics. We're going to look at them both financially and emotionally. We're going to explore them in different ways because personal finances are usually not about the money, but rather about your associations with money and finances. Although we are going to be fairly general in our discussion, we'd love to hear from you to make it more personal and more relevant to you. So please do reach out. Please call in. You can reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial, or you can post your comments and questions on Facebook and YouTube or wherever else you're listening. Today is a unique show because I literally could spend the entire show just on the accolades and accomplishments of today's guest. And they are very, very well deserved, I have to say that. What I would rather do is pick a select few of them, chat with her, and have a great conversation where she can share her insights that she has shared literally with thousands of people to make their lives better. She has gone from a Category 5 divorce to a Category 5 advocate and resource for others. Tina Swithin, known for chronicling her divorce journey, I would have probably used the word slugfest, but journey, in her internationally acclaimed One Mom's Battle, which has become a powerful brand and inspiration to many. Tina is an author. She is a creator of Family Court Awareness Month, which we will touch on as well. Founder of High Conflict Divorce Coach Certification Program, sought after by a myriad of different media outlets, has been recognized in many ways, one of them as a top 20 professional under 40. All of these are amazing and just scratches the surface of what she has done. She dedicates her life to raising awareness on narcissistic personality disorder and its impact on the victims, as well as the family court system, which I think sometimes is also a huge part of a divorce, but often ignored in what happens, how it goes through that, and the impact. Tina, it's actually a privilege to have you on my show. Thank you so much for joining us. And I am looking forward to having a great conversation with you.
I am honored to be here. It's such an important topic and it's a heavy one, but I'm so glad that we're going to talk about it.
Yeah. You know, your passion and your drive is obvious. Everybody knows. And your drive to share your message comes from a 10-year journey, as I said earlier, from the court system or through the court system, having taking the analogy of a journey, you had some detours with law enforcement, child welfare, and others. Can you share a little bit more about your story and also, I think, to inspire others, where your strength came from?
I will say, if you would have interviewed me back in 2009, before I stepped foot in the family court system, my naivety about the system and the process would have been glaring. I started my journey from my local women's shelter, and it was a place I had volunteered my time, made financial contributions to over the years. And so it was an incredibly humbling time in my life to actually find myself there and in need of services with two very little girls. Due to severe financial abuse, I was forced to act as my own attorney. And as daunting as that sounds to many, and it was to me at the time, I didn't have a choice. So would march myself into that courtroom, probably looking like a deer in headlights most of the time. But I entered the court system believing that the safety of my children would be the priority for everyone, the driving force. You hear that quote, "in the best interest of children." That is what I assumed would be embraced by everyone. And it was a pretty swift kick of reality when I discovered that the court system places a greater emphasis on parental rights than they do child safety. In our present day system, if someone has a pulse and they say they want to be a parent, the court is going to give them a standing ovation, even if it sacrifices the well-being and the safety of the child. So much of it, it's that saying, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And when you're in a situation where it's one word against the other, it's an uphill battle. And so from 2009 until 2019, when my case came to an end, there were almost 50 court dates, a 2-day trial, 2 full child custody evaluations, which each spanned about 6 months, where they come in and they rip apart every detail of your life, talk to everybody who knows you. We had minors counsel appointed who really did nothing to protect my children for 3 years. 3 child welfare investigations determined that my ex-husband was a moderate risk. That was their label, but they did nothing to actually protect them. Over a dozen interactions with law enforcement. So it was, constantly reaching out to agencies or talking to agencies who I believed were there to protect my kids, but it was just broken entity after broken entity. So, as for where my strength came from, I'll tell you, I had lots of pity parties, lots of tears. But at the end of the day, these 2 little girls were dependent on me to advocate for them and to be their voice. So I didn't really have a choice. You dust yourself off every day. You try again. I had to lean into my faith. And I would say my mentality at every single court date was, if you're not going to protect my kids on this round, I'm going to keep coming back, because until they're safe, I have to go to bed every night knowing that I've done everything in my power today to protect them. And if something happens, I needed to know that it wasn't because I didn't try.
Yeah, it's incredible, because I've known people. Firstly, you said you did pro se, which, figuring out the court system and the etiquette and the protocols on the fly is not easy, let alone coupling that with scared for your kids, scared for yourself, emotional time, fear of the unknown, and all the rest that comes with that. So absolutely incredible. And I think so many people are scared of pro se, but there are resources out there now for people who want to do pro se. And I think that's something that people, financially, sometimes they say, I cannot afford an attorney. Well, there are things that can be done without an attorney. And I think your story proves that 50 times over, having been in the courts 50 times. So, and beyond just the court experience, all the other pieces that come with that. So,
Right.
Incredible. But I think also for others to hear that message that there's hope and there are things that you can do. And that's something I find a lot, is people lose track of kind of their responsibility and their ownership sometimes, because they've got a professional. You're always the one that needs to be owning your divorce, I think. So, and, learning those protocols, learning all the things that you were speaking about. They say the devil's in the details, right? And you heard, I'm going back about 14 years, a long time, you heard 3 words, right? And that's what launched this hurricane: narcissistic personality disorder. So firstly, what is it? I'm going to ask you to explain that a little bit more, because I think often people throw around terms that, aren't quite accurate. So what is it to begin with? And then why, of all the things you were experiencing, I guess, why did these particular words have such an impact?
So narcissistic personality disorder, it's in the cluster B category of personality disorders. And the level of narcissism varies from person to person, and some are definitely more extreme on the scale. I do agree. It's a term that is very overused, especially present day. And it can only be diagnosed by a professional. But as a society, I think we have this false impression that it's the loud, obnoxious, boisterous person at the party. The presentation is quite different depending on the individual, just like with anything. There are some who are much more overt. There are some who are very, very covert, and they would never register on their scale, maybe, or on a scale. Maybe their feed supply comes from being seen as the do-gooder out there serving at homeless kitchens and things like that. So it's truly a wide range. Some of these individuals are much more skilled at impression management, but I would say the hallmark characteristics are lack of empathy, a need for admiration, preoccupation with status. I know those three things really described my ex-husband and the person I was married to. And, going back to your question, I ended up on my therapist's couch at the end of 2008, trying to make sense of my marriage, trying to understand back then what I could do to fix him or to fix things, or maybe even myself, because back then I was in such a daze and a fog. If someone would have told me that everything was my fault, I would have jumped in, I would have believed them, because I was living in this, I felt like a Twilight Zone world. I walked on eggshells. I didn't recognize myself when I looked in the mirror. And there were so many lies unraveling. And I was having to face the reality that my entire life was a facade. And I really didn't even know who I was married to. So it was after hearing my story, my therapist said, I need you to read this piece of, I need you to read an excerpt out of a book. And it was the diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. And she went on to tell me, I can't diagnose him, but I highly suspect this is what you're dealing with. And here's the part that, looking back, how naive I was. I read that descriptor, everything made sense, but I actually felt a sense of hope, because in my mind, if we had a label for it, we could tackle this. We could,
Right.
you and I could work together. We could figure it out. But the next bomb she delivered was, you either accept this as your life or you move on.
It's amazing, because the very first blog I wrote about 8 years ago, I actually called it Divorce is Awesome, right? And people didn't really like that title. I loved it. But I changed it to Perspective is Everything. And one of the big things that I mentioned in there is, like, you don't understand how much you change. You don't even recognize yourself anymore.
Right.
I was married for 20 years when I went through mine, but you do change, especially when you, as you were saying, you're trying to fix this person. So I'm going to be the one that changes. It's not them that's changing. It's not them that feel they need to change in this situation. You were the one that felt you needed to change, right? That's a very big difference. And so learning who you are, I think, becomes such a great thing. Sharona has just said, Tina, I feel like you're telling my story. Sharona, thank you for that. And, I think you're telling a lot of people's. Rochelle has come in and said, I love Tina, love her group. I'm curious to hear what the symptoms were of your narc, Tina, toward you and your kids. I think I'm going to hold that a little bit as we get a little bit more into talking about that post-separation abuse. And I'm going to ask you to touch base on that as well. But firstly, both Sharona and Rochelle, thank you for those comments. We were speaking a little bit earlier before the show, and I said how you have some groupies. I think this is some of that feedback, which is positive feedback, obviously, in what you're doing. So obviously, not that you need me to ask you or say it, but just keep doing it, because you do impact so many people's lives, right? So I just mentioned that post-separation, and we love our kids. we want to protect them. I mean, this is what you said. Your whole journey for 10 years was, how do I protect my kids, right? We're going to brag about them to anyone who'll listen. And even if you're not listening, I'm probably going to tell you about my kids anyway, right? We love them. But unfortunately, I think sometimes these are the people in a divorce that we don't know how to protect sometimes, right? One of the wonderful things that you've got, and it's a website that people can go to. The website is postseparationabuse.com. Again, I'll repeat that, postseparationabuse.com. But you've created this wheel that really informs people, and they may not know how to express it. They can look at this wheel and go, there it is. That's it right there, right? And unfortunately, this abuse comes in many forms, it's, as we know. So what would you say are the kind of those most overt, here they are, they stick out, they're easy to identify, and then maybe like, what is something that you see, but maybe a little bit kind of more covert and quiet and harder to identify when it comes to post-separation abuse?
I think it depends first on who you're up against, because the ones who are much more covert are going to, fly under the radar on these things. And I would say the majority of it, probably 99% of it, is so covert, and it's difficult enough to explain to people, and it's even more difficult to prove. And most people in our judicial system are not even educated on the 101 of domestic violence, of physical abuse. And so when you're trying to prove psychological abuse, emotional terrorism, so much of that, it's impossible. You don't have proof. You don't have something to, actually show. So much of it becomes documenting, whether it's a journal, whether it's online. And my case is very unique because I was successful. I'm one of the rare unicorns in the system who protected my children because of emotional and psychological abuse. It's stalking, it's intimidation, it's harassment, but most of these individuals are intelligent enough to where they would never do something to where they're going to cross that legal line.
Right.
And there's a story I can share about my own custody battle, which is a great example. It was a time in 2009. I was literally sleeping with a hammer under my pillow every night because I knew that my ex-husband was capable of taking my life. I could see that look in his eyes. I knew what was at stake, his image, finances, all of these things. I knew I was a target. And I woke up really early one morning, and as I opened my front door, he had lined my entire staircase with photographs, framed photographs from the top to the bottom. And I remember standing there shaking, 6 a.m., trying to absorb what I was looking at. And he's sitting in his parked car down below, waiting for me so he could see my reaction. And, he drove away with this terrifying smirk on his face. Now me, fast forward, trying to explain this to court or to law enforcement, he's just going to say that he was returning all of the photographs that the judge ordered him to return. The courts don't have the bandwidth to get into the details. And you have law enforcement that'll say it's a family court issue. The court's saying you should have called law enforcement if you were really afraid. And because law enforcement didn't verify this, we have nothing to go on. So living like that with someone lurking, and you never know where they're going to pop up. It's a horrible way to live.
I cannot even imagine it. The best I can say is it's terrifying, and that doesn't give it justice. I will say, firstly, I'm thrilled and so happy that you are okay. Let's start with that. They say when our executive functioning shuts down and we go straight to that primitive brain, they say when you're in this situation, you either fight, you flee, or you freeze. Obviously, you chose I don't know if you chose necessarily, but the limbic brought out the fight in you. Obviously, over time, it was a choice. So firstly, for those that have benefited, it's amazing that you were able to do that to begin with. Just coming back to that post-separation abuse before we go to a break, I do want to just read the categories on the wheel so that people get an understanding, because sometimes we don't even know how to name what we're experiencing. But and this is in no particular order: financial abuse, counter-parenting, which is an interesting term. I love that. Alienation allegations, neglectful or abuseful parenting, coercive control, isolation, harassment and stalking. We've just heard a case. And legal abuse. I think when we come back, we're going to touch on a little bit more on this. And before we do, please, if you would, share how people can get in touch with you or learn more, because your website has an enormous amount of information on it for them.
onemomsbattle.com, and we're on all the social media channels. We have an amazing community of survivors who come together and support each other. So I welcome anyone.
And I just got to say, the two people that posted are from very different parts of the country as well. So just to show kind of where you're reaching people. I am Hirsch Serman. I'm the host for the show, and my website is lifecycle.financial, and we will be back in 2 minutes. Thank you.
Divorced and become involved in the family court system, there are no winners. Everybody loses, especially the children. I know, because my custody battle lasted years, was completely unnecessary, and financially devastating. That experience inspired SplitSmart. SplitSmart is designed to empower both parents by giving them the structure they need to stay on course for a more peaceful and respectful co-parenting future. For less than amicable couples, our unique line-item negotiation approach helps soften sometimes emotional stances into child-centered agreements that both parents can live with. Do you want your children to thrive and grow up with healthy, loving relationships with both parents? How much easier would it be if you could bypass the conflict and create a clear, supportive, and comprehensive co-parenting plan and schedule that's tailored specifically for your family? Can you imagine what it would be like if there were no arguments about money or child support? If any of this appeals to you, if you want to minimize the expense and drama of divorce, do yourself and your children a big favor and use SplitSmart to craft your co-parenting and support plans. And as an added benefit, even if you've done your best and still can't get all the way there, SplitSmart will have your information well organized, so a skilled mediator or family lawyer can efficiently help your family cross the finish line. Visit splitsmart.com today to get started on creating a brighter and more joyous tomorrow for you and your kids.
Hello and welcome back to the Financial Wellness Hour. We are on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. I'm thrilled to have Tina Swithin today from One Mom's Battle, or I should say the creator of One Mom's Battle, which is just an enormous resource for people everywhere. And I want to recap some of the things because firstly, I'm blown away. I knew some of your story. I didn't know all the details, but firstly, so it's amazing that you shared the depth of what you did, the abuse, the hammer. For you, you've probably said it, 6,000 times at this point. For people listening to the show, this might be the first time they're hearing that. And obviously, nobody should be living in that way or anything close to that way, So we did speak about your 10-year battle a little bit, and you shared your story and your drive and the inspiration, I guess, from your children to keep going, and you've paid it forward in many ways as well. And as you said, going from a hurricane level 5 divorce into what you do now. We spoke about post-separation abuse, which we're going to come back to. You shared a little bit on the narcissistic personality disorder, your story, the safety of your children, the naivety, I think was the word you used, in going into the court system thinking they are going to do everything to protect your children, and really having to do an immediate pivot in, this is not how it's happening, I've got to take that role, and where you are today. So again, welcome back. We were speaking about the post-separation abuse, the wheel. We mentioned those categories, and one of the things you said, which is interesting, because most people think that, as you said, that narcissistic personality is the one that says, here I am, give me the attention, right? And that's not the case. And to make it even harder, when you said, the abuse that is happening is on this kind of on the download, covert way, and it works its way into the fabric of a relationship. Can you share a little bit more on how do you maybe identify it then, if it is this quiet, covert approach to controlling someone?
So, if a person is experiencing this, they know it. They probably just don't have the words to articulate it, because, most victims of abuse or survivors of abuse likely have a diagnosis of PTSD, where you just go blank trying to explain these things to people when they don't understand. So, I often say the abuse I suffered post-separation was definitely worse than the abuse I suffered during my marriage. And when you receive your family court case number, it's almost like you're also assigned your own personal terrorist. That's truly how I have described it over the years. I remember saying that to my therapist, and her saying, that's exactly what's happening to you. And so it's, for me, so much of my journey has been helping to educate people. So, because when I had those light bulb moments that this is what it is, and I have a label, it helps you to understand, it helps you to not feel like you're alone or the person who's unstable. And so for me, just helping people to, here's a wheel, and it's probably your entire life. And
Right.
I'll tell you what's happening, because you probably don't know.
So are some more common than others on that wheel?
Yeah, yes. I would say the post-separation abuse that involves the children is probably the most common and the most painful. The abuser knows that the number one way to maintain that power and control that they need, we have a misconception about domestic violence. We know it's about power and control, and
Right.
that doesn't just vanish when the relationship ends. That's where there's a disconnect. And so what the abuser does to maintain that power and control, they use the children as pawns and as weapons. And a lot of times when the victim or the survivor pushes the financial button, which all narcissists, that's probably their image button and their financial button are the two biggest, most powerful ones. Whether this is spousal support, child support, the abuser retaliates by going after the survivor's biggest button, which is usually the children. And so there's a lot of retaliatory actions that take place in these dynamics. And sadly, for victims of domestic violence, the resources that are available to them when they're in the relationship end when they hit the family court system. So, we're failing our domestic violence victims.
And I want to add to that, if I may. I think the domestic violence is traditionally just seen in this physical way, somebody striking another person. Abuse, the physical abuse turns often into this emotional and control in a very different way, because physically they might be separated, and that's all they've got left in order to be able to control somebody.
Absolutely.
And so understanding that, I think also being able to look at a wheel like this and have somebody identify it is a very powerful thing, especially we look at children and we say, oh, they're so young, they don't understand sometimes, right? Well, sometimes we don't always understand what's going on with ourselves. But coming back, I guess, to the children, there are a lot of considerations, obviously, when you're contemplating a divorce. Generally, when there's tension in the home, children see it, they sense it, they know something's wrong in this marriage. And they've seen changes. Maybe at some point there was a levity and a love that's maybe missing now, and this tension now. And I think too often, sometimes, especially children who don't understand, they might be too young, they sometimes think it's their fault. What am I doing? And that's a horrendous burden for a child to have to carry, thinking it's them. So couple all of that with now an abusive co-parent on the safe parent. Now, I'm going to ask, are there things that you can share, some advice to the safe parent out there in, how can you communicate with your children and help them feel a little bit more safe? Because I think people struggle with that a lot.
Yeah. And it's a hard one because both parties are equally under a microscope. So having any type of communication with your child about adult issues can really come back to haunt the protective parent. And so I think it's really important to have a child therapist on board to help navigate these difficult topics, conversations, situations. But equally important is us teaching our children about healthy behavior versus unhealthy behavior, just in general terms. Number one, so they don't go forward and repeat the cycle. It's our job to break this cycle. So teaching them about red flags, about what boundaries are, about that it's a red flag when a person doesn't respect boundaries or when they speak poorly to another human. And never directing that conversation to the abusive parent, because I believe it's so much more powerful for our kids to connect the dots on their own. And I'm really have always been really careful to never speak poorly about their biological father to them. And it's a difficult position to find yourself in, because if your child is being bullied on the playground at school by a third grader, we would be encouraged to talk to them about it, how to handle the situation, how to empower them. But when their own parent is the bully, your hands are tied by the court system.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think we forget sometimes that we are being scrutinized, not just by the courts or by others, but our children are watching. They know there's something wrong and they're trying to figure it out. And so they're watching maybe sometimes more intently than, what might have been happening years ago. So I think remembering also that this is an incredible opportunity to be a role model for your children in a positive way, especially I think sometimes, it's like the woman, kind of thing from of old. We can have a powerful woman come out of this and be a role model to say, yes, there's adversity in life, but look what you can do with that. Look how you can overcome that. And, celebrate those small wins, because the small wins grow and they become big wins. And so I think there's a lot of what you just said that it resonates, I think, so much with clients that I work with, but I think just as a wonderful lesson in general, it doesn't have to be a divorce. Everyone goes through adversity. That's part of life. How do we role model that? How do we react? And how do we teach others and show the way for others? I think becomes a big piece of that.
Yeah.
So I got to take a deep breath after that. We have probably about 8 more minutes, and I have about 25 more questions for you. So I think what I'd like to do to make sure that people get us in, and then maybe come back to some of the other questions, but
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, you know, how you work with and the resources that you have for people. I think, you know, one of the biggest fears that people have in general, but especially going through something they've never gone through before, is the fear of the unknown. And you know, I've had clients say to me, I just wish I knew how it worked. Like,
Right.
you know, can you talk a little bit more? You've got a wonderful program in training coaches in high conflict.
Right.
You've worked with people in this way as well, but you or your coaches, or just in general, that, you know, the people you've trained, how do they work with people? How do you set the right expectations? How do they guide people? Things like that.
So I think one of the biggest pieces, you know, we become strategy partners for someone, because when you're in that, you're so overwhelmed with emotions. You almost need someone to come on board and say, I want to help you look at this realistically. I want to help educate you on the system. And a big piece of what we do is painful. It's a painful pill to swallow, but it's radical acceptance, managing your expectations about the system appropriately. You know, when it comes to justice or fairness, which is kind of the impression we have when we're thinking of court, neither one of those things are going to come from the family court system. And that's a big pill for people to swallow. And a lot of people really struggle with that step. They get caught up on, it's not fair. It's not, you know, they want the other party to be held accountable for all of their wrongs during the relationship. And that's not the venue for that to happen. You know, the reality is that we are just case numbers to the court. We're all lumped into the same category. And the mentality that we're up against is, you married this person. It's not our job to solve your problems. So, you know, and we try to help people understand their system, what matters in their system, look at their case strategically, work with their attorney when needed. But, you know, one of the common things I hear back from clients is, if I would have been working with you from day one, I would have probably saved $100,000 in attorney fees, because I've been looking to my attorney to be my therapist, and he doesn't want that job, or she doesn't want that job. So it's a lot of hand holding and brainstorming and working together to profile the person they're up against, to know where the buttons are to stay away from, you know, all of those things.
I mean, I'm saying this facetiously, obviously, but if anybody wants a $500 an hour therapist that's not trained as a therapist, they can call me. In reality, there are a lot of resources, and you need to build your team. I preach this a lot. You know, your attorney is kind of the quarterback often, I don't want to say always, but often is a quarterback for you in your team. But don't have them be your emotional coach or your divorce coach. Don't have them be your financial expert. There are people that are very specifically trained in that, two of them being on this call right now in this conversation. Really select them appropriately, because you will spend an enormous amount of money trying to get resolution on things that just aren't there. You know, the other thing that you brought up, which I hear so strongly, is we look at the court as this panacea of all ills. I've been wronged, they're going to set it right. And that doesn't happen. I'll be blunt on that. You know, judges are people. They wake up and they have good days, they have bad days, they have their biases. And I'm not slamming judges, right? We all have this. They look at the law differently. You know, you can have 3 or 4 family law judges in the same county and can interpret a case differently. This is the reality of it. It's not that they're good or bad. It's just, this is the reality of going through the court system. So couple that with not understanding the process, not understanding their focus. And, you know, I'm dealing with a case right now where the attorney said to me, we're going to court, and I'm hoping I can get 30 minutes of the judge's time. You got 2 people pleading a case in 30 minutes to know whether you should go to court or not. It's just a system that right now is not functioning optimally. And you do need to understand that. I think it's very important. We mentioned earlier, and I would love to have you back on the show for this. We have about 3 minutes left. I'm trying to be cautious on that. But I mentioned earlier that you had started Family Court Awareness Month. And again, understanding the courts, especially if you're going to go through them, is vital to understanding how to navigate your case. So it's just been an enormous eye-opener for people, I think, to understand all of that. I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about the idea behind and the purpose of that month. And then we'll dive into that more come, probably about August, September time to really start promoting that.
Absolutely. 2 years ago, I decided, kind of in a moment of frustration, a whim, I'm going to pack my family in an RV and we're going to drive across the country and raise awareness of the issues in the family court system, because most people have no idea what's happening and that our children are not being prioritized. And so even if your case is not in family court, it's a problem that belongs to all of us. It's a crisis. Yeah. And so we scheduled 7 different media stops across the country, from California all the way to North Carolina. We had speakers come, several mothers whose children have been murdered at the hands of divorcing parents. It was a powerful opportunity for us to connect with domestic violence advocates, media, family court professionals, judges, and start these conversations. Quickly to recap, last year, we took it to a community level and we empowered survivors in their own communities to reach out to elected officials, mayors, get proclamations declaring their county or city as Family Court Awareness Month. And we have 225 cities, counties, and 11 different states on board. Wow. In 2 years, we have really plowed through and raised a lot of awareness.
That is absolutely amazing. And I encourage people to get involved in that and to understand what's going on. You only kind of get one chance of going through this. So do it right, understand what's going on, and then help others as others are helping you. I'm going to ask, unfortunately, we have to wrap this up, but I'm going to ask, please, if you can just share one more time how people can get in touch with you as well.
onemomsbattle.com, info@onemomsbattle.com. We also have a website for familycourtawarenessmonth.com.
Everyone, I really encourage you to go to those websites. There's an amazing amount of material. We spoke only about one small piece of that today. So definitely encourage people to do that. Tina, thank you so much, because this is a topic that people don't really know how to approach, let alone talk about it in the way that you have, with such clarity and just such kind of surgical precision in some ways as well, which I love as well. So thank you for that. I am Hirsch Serman, your host for the Financial Wellness Hour. Please reach out to me through my website, lifecycle.financial. Again, that's lifecycle.financial. You can reach out to me with questions, or for Tina Swithin, our guest today from One Mom's Battle. Thank you, CC Schatz, behind the scenes, making it so easy for me to just have a great conversation. Appreciate that, and I look forward to everyone joining me next week on my show, and have a great week. Thank you.